Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to The Collision. It is Daniel here, and I am excited, honored today to be joined by a very special guest, and that is Mr. Diederik Hoogstraten. He is the writer of the upcoming film Young Washington, hitting theaters this July 3rd. Thank you so much for taking the time to stop by and chat about this new film.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I should say right from the start, I've actually had the chance to see this movie already, and
Nice.
congratulations on what you were able to, I know your contribution to this film, because it is fantastic. I think a lot of people are really going to love this movie when it hits theaters on July 3rd. So well done on that. And there is a
Great
lot
to
to get
hear.
into with this film. There's a lot of interesting things about because obviously
Mhm,
George Washington is he's a fascinating individual. There's a lot of stories that could be told about his life. A lot of books that have been written. Maybe to start just from the beginning a bit, like what was your writing process? Like how did you determine this is young Washington, so it's focused on a
mhm.
specific period of his life, but kind of how did you go about as a writer determining like what to cover in this film, like what not to cover? Was it certain moments you wanted to include, or maybe like a character arc?
Mhm.
Like, how did you go from the start of this project? Like, how did you sort of make some of those decisions?
Yeah, great question, because this was also a special kind of process. As a writer, I was paired up with John Irwin. I'm sure your audience is familiar with him. The Jesus Revolution, American Underdog, the House of David series on Amazon. John is just a visionary, terrific filmmaker, and he had this idea of telling the origin story, if you will, the coming of age of George Washington. And so, in this case, he engaged me and my fellow writer Tom Provost to basically to download his brain, if you will, to download his ideas for this film, and then go and write the screenplay. He had John had read all the biographies and knew very clearly which big moments from those younger years he wanted to include in the film. So we had a framework based on the conversations with our filmmaker, John Irwin. We went and did our own research, and then it was always clear that we were going to start the film with George at age 11 when he loses his father. A traumatic moment for any kid, right? Losing a parent at that age. He was left with his siblings and his mom on a farm. As a result, George couldn't go to school. Certainly couldn't go to England. His people might not realize this. The young George Washington desperately wanted to be British. He either wanted to be part of the British colonial elite, or better yet, he just wanted to go to England and be with them and be like them. But thank goodness he was never accepted in those circles, so that ultimately he could, fight for independence and become our first president here. But so we knew we were going to start it at age 11. And then John also knew he wanted to limit that coming of age story till about age 23. And that's when the young Commander Washington really starts leading the Virginia Regiment for the first time. That's 12 years, still a long time, but tremendous amount happened in that short period of time. You've seen the film. There are battles, there are losses, there are failures. There's a girl who he has a crush on, who he doesn't get. There's party scenes. There's a lot going on, and yeah, we picked some of the biggest moments we think that are also that are visually and cinematically interesting, but also tell us a lot about the man that he would become.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the, I mean, one of the opportunities you guys had with this film is that George Washington is an almost like mythic figure. Like obviously he's a real
Hmm.
person, but there's so
Yeah.
much just legend about him. So much that he did like larger than life. And obviously, as the title implies, the story is focused, like you said, on an early part of his life. So he's not really like the fully formed man that he would become. But I'm
Hmm.
curious, like as a writer, as you work to kind of get into the headspace of this man who would grow up to become this mythic presidential figure, like
Hmm.
what did you see as sort of like the essence of the man or the character that even at an early age you wanted to make sure you conveyed in a story?
Yeah, another excellent question, because I think our goal was truly to make him more relatable. Like you said, he can be very austere. He, like many great men and women from history, I think we sometimes revere them to the point of keeping our distance. We don't want to get too close. John Irwin and we felt very strongly like, no, let's make him human as we can, so that we can relate more to him and admire him even more. And that, I think really showing his resilience, that was one of the big parts of it. This boy and this young man went through so much, all these hardships, all these challenges, all these failures. It made him resilient, as well as sort of his integrity really came sort of was rising above in response to all that tragedy. When he starts losing battles after being a very, very young commander of this brand new regiment in Virginia, it has real consequences. It's not just that he has to retreat, it's that men lose their lives, families lose their sons. And we try to show that as a young man, George didn't always know what he was doing. He was ambitious. Maybe sometimes his ambition got in his way. He got on in his own way. He failed. But the key point being not only that he got up again, but that he really carried the consequences of these failures. In other words, his integrity started to be present and started to be appreciated by his superiors. I want to give a shout out to Ben Kingsley, terrific role as Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia. We have these scenes where George keeps coming into that office and the two of them go back and forth. And at the moment I'm thinking about where that integrity comes into play is where George says, I have failed you. I have failed my men. I have failed myself. I am not made for this. And he walks away. From my personal perspective, there's a lot we don't know. I always say we're not historians. We're not experts. We've just learned what we could and we fill in the blanks. But from my perspective, I think his superiors and also General Braddock, the English general played by Andy Serkis beautifully, these men appreciated him over and over again because he was honest, because he was not afraid to embrace sort of the consequences of his failures and learn from them. That's a level of humility that many of us will never learn over the course of our life. And George Washington was learning it as a teenager, and in his early 20s. So there was something special there. And then, of course, his mother, we can talk about her more, just another beautiful role by Mary Louise Parker. She was, of course, a very hurt, grieving widow, lost her son, lost her husband, was running a farm. She was tough. She was tough on George as well, but she, at the same time, she tried to help him see the path, forge the path, stay the course, don't give up, as long as you do it for something greater than yourself. That's something she brings up. And so there were these themes in his life of failure and misadventure and this very flawed man dealing with the realities of life and him continually rising above. I think we can all learn something from that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I appreciated about this film too. I know
Mm.
just with things like the Michael Jackson movie that recently came out, like a lot of discussion about how do you elevate sort of these heroic figures while also being honest about their shortcomings, or
Yes.
this the
Hmm.
honest about the time that they lived. And this film, I think, balances that really well.
Good.
I want to ask.
Thank you.
It's interesting too because I've a lot of my interviews I've been able to do. I've talked to filmmakers. I've actually John Irwin about his House of David, and kind of like
Yeah.
the task of adapting the biblical text and being faithful to the
Hmm.
scripture. And obviously adapting history is not quite as sacred as something like I would feel the biblical text, but there is
Yes.
sort of that same question of you're dealing with real historical stuff that happened, but you're not making a documentary, you're making a cinematic 2 hour entertaining movie. Did you have any like kind of guiding principles for how you did that, or was it just as it came up making decisions of what can we change or what's sort of
Mm.
off limits we got to present? Like how did you sort of navigate sort of filtering the history into like a cinematic movie?
Mm. Yeah, I love that question because definitely when we started talking about the project, before we had typed the letter, there was definitely a sense of being a little intimidated by the prospect of it. This is one of the great men in world history, not just American history. And so hopefully the being intimidated sort of went to the background and it turned into more of a reverence for the men that we never wanted to lose. I do sometimes apologize if I call him George or my guy. I never want to be disrespectful to President Washington. It's just that we spent so much time with this character, forging him, creating him, making him do certain things, say certain things. You feel like you get to know the guy. But of course, we're all extremely reverential. I would say, the biographies, especially Joseph Ellis and Noam Chernow, great historians, they've written about his younger years. But what we all know is that it's a very limited number of facts about his younger years. There's just a lot that we don't know. And so we always wanted to be extremely respectful for what the historical record shows. And that was always going to be the backbone of the movie, if you will. But we knew that we then had to fill in all those blanks. We always wanted to do that with the greatest possible respect for what the era would have been like, the way people talked and dressed, and what they would have done or never would have done. And, thankfully, John found some terrific historians to advise on the film and to sort of, maybe steer us a little bit in the back to the right direction if we blew it. But I think in general, we tried to to stay as true as we could to sort of the spirit of the time and of the person.
Yeah, and I think, that
Yeah.
kinda leads into the next thing I wanted to ask you, because I think there's sort of that commitment to the history, to the character. Because I think in many ways this film might, maybe defy some people's expectations. I think, people
Oh,
know John Irwin a lot for his, more, I guess, explicit biblical adaptations or faith-based films. I think Angel Studios, Wonder, they have a reputation for certain types of content. I think if you go into this movie without knowing any of the production history,
yeah.
it's very difficult to put it in a box politically,
Mm.
religiously. This is it's a movie. It's, first and foremost. How conscious were you in the making of this to leave this as open and accessible to
Yeah.
anyone, as opposed to really aiming it at a specific demographic?
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I think we all have worked really, really hard from the very beginning till this point to make a movie for everyone. As I often say, maybe we can get back to a point where I'm a new American. I'm an immigrant. I became a very proud American. I live now in Texas. I always say my daughters now wear cowboy boots to church. It doesn't get more American and Texan than that. But I wasn't born as an American, and I strongly feel that I think we can all get back to this idea of how great and how cool is it to be an American. And when you look at this part of early American history, what I hope is that we will all feel that sort of on a deep level. And that is to say that we really hope this movie is for everyone, is that it unites, if you will. Uh, Not because we're trying to preach a message of being united. It's just that it's a great story that is all of our story. George Washington belongs to all of us. The story is all of all of our origin story. And so, yes, we really hope and think that Democrats and Republicans and left and right and religious and non-religious, and regardless of your background, this can truly be a compelling and inspiring film, really an encouraging film is maybe the way to put it. But that's the reason that, Angel Studios has this thing going where you can pay it forward, where everybody's encouraged to buy some tickets for students, for high school and middle school students, because we want all of them to be exposed to an exciting, cool representation of history, not in a book, not in old pictures, but hey, William Franklin Miller. I think we've mentioned him. He's a terrific English actor. He's a good-looking guy. He brings, I think, the spirit of the young George Washington truly to the screen in a magnificent way.
Yeah, and I'll say too, I have two 11-year-old twin boys, and when they saw the trailer for this in theaters, they've been begging for me to. So maybe I'll take them in theaters when it comes out, see on the big screen.
Love it.
Two
Oh,
final
great.
questions. One, obviously, this film's releasing intentionally, to coincide with July 4th and the 250th anniversary. Even though it is unique in the fact that, as you've mentioned, like the film covers sort of pre-Revolutionary War. You don't really have America yet, in the part of the film that's covered. But maybe to speak briefly, just kind of how you went about, because you touched on it already, just sort of elevating sort of the American spirit, or like it very much is a celebration of America, even though it takes place in a time period that is sort of predates America as we know it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there is this sense of there's a sense of can-do adventurism in the film that we might not always think about when we think of colonial Virginia, and that's again because maybe we haven't seen enough of it sort of brought to life in film and television. That's why we have film, right? Is to try to see and feel and hear what it was like. And I do love the way we try to portray George as a frontierman, like he was a bit of a wild man. Like he loved riding horses fast. He wanted to be out there. He loved to camp. He went into the Western frontier, which, by the way, at the time, of course, was Ohio. We're not talking about the Rocky Mountains, man. But it's land where, as someone says to him, like, "Are you sure you want to go there? Because most of the men that we send never return." And George says, "Yeah, yeah, I want to go. Maybe that's why I want to go." So there is that sense of courage, of exploration, of finding the freedom there. These themes that like early American themes up to this, I strongly believe that still exist today. We try to show that it was in the people and in the land and in the place, and specifically in George Washington at that time.
Yeah, and I think this film definitely it does communicate that. I think this will make a lot of people
Nice.
proud when they see it, especially Americans. Kind of last question for you. Obviously, I know as a writer, as someone involved in this, probably all of you involved in this project, your main hope is you want to entertain people. You want it to be a good movie. You want them to have a good
Yes.
time going to see it. And obviously, I'm sure you would, you appreciate some good reviews and a decent box office and
Yeah.
all of that. But kind of beyond some of this, those standard Hollywood,
Mm,
criteria or affirmations, like what is it that you hope audiences take away from this? Like, as
mm.
someone that wrote the original script for this, like,
Yeah.
what in your eyes would make this film a success?
Yes. Love the way you frame it, and it's not just the box office receipts. You're totally right. We Wonder Project, Angel Studios. We try to make films that mean more, that say more, right? It's called values based, not really faith based, but we want the values that we cherish to be present in these films. And I think in this case, seeing the incredible value of serving, like in the broadest sense of the word. George learns what it means to serve. We don't want to give it away, but the opening scene, we return to that later in the film when George suddenly realizes what he has to do, and it's extremely dangerous. It is likely going to get him killed, but he's going to do it in order to serve something much greater than himself. And if that was in young George Washington, long before he could even imagine being president of a country that didn't exist yet, then maybe all of us can take a lesson from that, take some inspiration from that, and also an encouragement that before he got there. Again, I go back to we're all flawed, we're all challenged, we're all struggling, and I know life can feel very, very rough, especially for an 18-year-old or 22-year-old. Watch this movie and see how someone who you think deals with it. And it's not the easy way. It's never the easy way, but it does mean accepting, perhaps seeing and accepting something greater than yourself. I mean, if people can sort of pick up on that message, I'll be grateful.
Yeah, and I think they will. I think you guys did a fantastic job with this movie. I loved it. Again, for those listening, releases July 3rd. And I'll say this is a very cinematic movie. This is a movie that is worth seeing in
Mm,
theaters and not waiting for it because
yes.
it's beautiful. Some of the shots that were pulled off in this movie. But thank you so much. I love your passion. I love this movie. So congrats on that. And just thanks for taking the time to chat about the film.
Thanks, Daniel. Really enjoyed it. And thank you for your support of the film.